In 2006, 20 years after the disaster, a Ukrainian journalist named Alla Yaroshevskaya published classified documents she had obtained from a former health ministry official. The documents were radiation maps, detailed color-coded maps showing the exact dispersion of the Chernobyl plume over Kiev between April 27th and May 4th, 1986. The maps had been created in real time by Soviet monitoring teams. They showed radiation levels in every district, every park, every school. And they showed something more damning. The maps had been presented to the Ukrainian Communist Party Central Committee on April 29th, 2 days before the Mayday parade. The decision to proceed was made with full knowledge of what the air contained. This is not merely a chronicle of nuclear fallout and epidemiological crisis. It is a masterclass in authoritarian gaslighting. The events that unfolded explore the precise mechanics of how a centralized government can weaponize information, enforce a systemic denial of reality, and deliberately expose millions of civilians to lethal danger to maintain an illusion of control. The disaster itself originated from a fatal intersection of flawed engineering and a pervasive lack of safety culture within the Soviet nuclear sector. But the human tragedy that blanketed the surrounding cities was entirely engineered by men making deliberate choices that prioritized ideological optics over survival.
Let us rewind to the night the world changed. It is the early hours of April 26, 1986. 130 kilometers north of the Ukrainian capital of Kiev, an experiment is taking place at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Reactor number 4 utilizes an RBMK-1000 design, which is a graphite-moderated reactor known to possess a dangerous positive void coefficient. This means that as cooling water boils into steam, the reactor's power output will inherently surge. The operators are conducting a delayed and poorly executed safety test. During this procedure, they inadvertently allow the reactor to succumb to xenon poisoning. This is a perilous condition where fission byproducts absorb neutrons and stall the nuclear reaction. The control room is tense. The operators are desperate to force the reactor's power back up to complete the test. They make a series of fatal, irreversible choices. They manually withdraw nearly all the control rods from the core. They bypass critical automatic safety systems, completely disabling the emergency core cooling system. The reactor is now running blind, stripped of its safeguards, hovering on the edge of a runaway chain reaction. When the test is finally initiated, the reactor experiences a catastrophic power excursion. The sudden insertion of graphite-tipped control rods displaces the cooling water without introducing neutron poison. The result is instantaneous.
At 1:23, a massive steam explosion rips through the facility. It blows the 1,000-ton roof entirely off the reactor. This is immediately followed by a second explosion and a raging graphite fire. The shattered core functions as an open-air radiological geyser. For 10 straight days, it pumps an unprecedented volume of radioactive material directly into the atmosphere, permanently altering the global perspective on atomic energy. But as the graphite burns and the invisible isotopes spew into the night sky, the residents of the region sleep soundly in their beds. They have no idea that their reality has just fractured. The sun rises on April 26th. It is a beautiful, sunny spring day in Kiev. The city is alive with ordinary weekend activity. Citizens are out fishing in the Dnieper River. Families are tending to their gardens in the mild weather. Everywhere you look, people are preparing for the upcoming Mayday holidays. The stark contrast between this peaceful civilian life and the looming disaster just 130 kilometers to the north creates an immediate, powerful, dramatic irony. There are 2.5 million people living in this city. None of them can see the threat. None of them can smell the danger. Radiation is the perfect, silent intruder. Initially, the wind is on their side. For the critical first 48 hours following the explosion, the Soviet state maintains an absolute blackout of information.
The initial radioactive plume is carried by prevailing winds northwest, drifting over the Baltic Sea. The invisible dust begins settling on Scandinavian countries. Swedish meteorologists and scientists quickly analyze the isotopic composition of the fallout settling on their towns. They rapidly deduce that a massive, uncontained core breach has occurred, entirely contradicting the complete silence from the east. Radiological alarms are triggered at the Forsmark nuclear plant in Sweden. The international community begins forcefully demanding an explanation. Backed into a corner, the Soviet news agency TASS finally issues a terse, obscure 20-second statement on the evening news, simply acknowledging an accident. Domestically, the official narrative immediately pivots to minimization and the projection of absolute control. State-run newspapers like Pravda and Vechernyi Kiev bury small, dismissive notes about the disaster on their back pages, ensuring the true scale of the catastrophe remains hidden from the populace. The propaganda machine works tirelessly to assure the public that radiation levels are safe, drinking water is uncontaminated, and the situation is normalizing. To distract the citizens, Soviet television heavily broadcasts documentaries regarding historical nuclear mishaps by capitalist adversaries. They focus extensively on the American 3 Mile Island incident of 1979, pointing fingers at the West, while their own reactor continues to burn open to the sky. Then, the meteorological conditions shift. The wind patterns change drastically, pushing the highly radioactive front south and east directly toward Kiev. The city center is right in the crosshairs. Background radiation in the Ukrainian capital begins to increase exponentially. By April 30th, a thriving city of 2.5 million people is being transformed into a severe hazard zone. Behind closed doors, the reality is documented with terrifying precision. Secret Politburo protocols reveal that hospitalization numbers are being tracked meticulously. The state's absolute monopoly on information ensures that true radiological and epidemiological measurements are actively suppressed, altered, or hidden within classified KGB dossiers. The maps exist. The data is real. The leadership knows exactly what the air contains. The tension is mounting rapidly. Tomorrow is May 1st. The traditional Mayday parade is scheduled to take place in the heart of Kiev. Thousands of citizens, including children in rehearsal costumes, are ordered to march in the open air. Volodymyr Sherbitsky, the first secretary of the Communist Party of Ukraine and the de facto head of the Ukrainian Republic, sits in his office. He is a conservative hardliner and a close ally of the late Leonid Brezhnev. He has just been fully briefed on the surging dosimeter readings across his capital. He looks at the numbers. He knows the environment is toxic. Sherbitsky picks up the telephone. He actively requests permission from Moscow to cancel the massive parade. He knows that sending his citizens into the streets under these conditions is a profound betrayal. The man on the other end of the line is Mikhail Gorbachev, the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Gorbachev is currently cultivating an international reputation as a reformer through his policies of glasnost or openness. But his response to Sherbitsky perfectly encapsulates the absolute brutality of the Soviet system.
Gorbachev issues a dire ultimatum over the telephone. He reportedly threatens that if Sherbitsky causes a panic by canceling the parade, he will be forced to put his party card on the table. In the Soviet hierarchy, this is a thinly veiled euphemism for the absolute termination of his political career and potentially his freedom. Sherbitsky is caught completely between the undeniable radiological reality unfolding in his city and the rigid, unforgiving demands of the central Kremlin apparatus. The wind is blowing. The radioactive dust is settling on the wide pavements of Chreshchatyk Street. The citizens are ironing their clothes for the celebration, trusting their government. The decision is made, and the consequences will last for generations. The morning of May 1st arrives. You are standing on Chreshchatyk Street, the grand central artery of Kiev. The sky above you is a brilliant, deceitful blue.
Red banners flutter from the neoclassical buildings. Brass bands play triumphant socialist anthems. Thousands of your fellow citizens are marching in the traditional Mayday parade, exactly as Moscow ordered. Children in bright rehearsal costumes dance across the pavement. You breathe in deeply. The air feels warm. It feels normal. But hidden within that air is an invisible, creeping terror. While you wave your flags, men in unmarked vehicles are reading the secret KGB dosimeters. They see what you cannot. The distribution of the radioactive fallout is highly uneven, driven by shifting microclimates and specific wind currents. Right where you are standing, in the city center, gamma radiation levels are registering between 0.5 and 0.8 milliroentgens per hour. But just a few kilometers away, in the northwestern neighborhood of Nivki, the invisible payload hits with brutal force. Nivki lies closer to the incoming plume. The radiation levels there spike violently to 15 milliroentgens per hour. To understand this number, you must know that natural background radiation is typically measured in fractions of a microroentgen. The air the citizens of Nivki are breathing represents an exposure rate dozens to hundreds of times higher than normal background levels. This is occurring at the exact moment citizens are ordered outdoors for ideological celebrations. You look up at the towering viewing podiums. Standing there, projecting an image of absolute control, is Volodymyr Sherbitsky. He smiles down at the crowd. He waves at the dancing children. And standing right next to him is a young boy. It is Sherbitsky's own grandson. The first secretary has brought his own family to the reviewing stand. He is utilizing his own flesh and blood as human props to project an illusion of absolute safety to the marching crowds. He knows the numbers from Nivki. He knows the wind is carrying lethal isotopes. Yet he stands there, trading the health of his grandson to protect his Communist Party card from Mikhail Gorbachev's wrath. The physical reality of the city, however, is beginning to contradict this official optimism. Meanwhile, a massive, surreal operation is unfolding in the shadows of the celebration. To prevent the resuspension and inhalation of radioactive dust particles containing highly toxic transuranic elements, liquidators deploy fleets of specialized municipal and military trucks. They suddenly appear on the wide, tree-lined boulevards. You watch as these heavy vehicles constantly wash the streets, the sidewalks, and the spring foliage. They are spraying a sticky, dust-suppressing organic polymer solution. The locals colloquially call it borda, which means molasses. This relentless urban scrubbing is highly effective at gluing the radioactive dust to the ground. Radiological assessments will later indicate that this daily washing decreases the collective external radiation dose to the millions of inhabitants by an estimated 3,000 man-sieverts. But for you, the citizen, it is terrifying. The state television tells you there is no danger, but military trucks are foaming your neighborhood. You begin to taste a sharp metallic tang of iodine on your tongue. Meanwhile, deep inside the government buildings, the crisis is expanding from the air to the water. The contamination of the regional water supply presents an existential crisis for Kiev and the broader Ukrainian Republic. Radioactive sludge and surface runoff are heavily laced with iodine-131, barium-140, tellurium-132, and long-lived isotopes like cesium-137 and strontium-90. This toxic cocktail breaches the Dnieper River basin rapidly. Secret reports indicate that radioactive water from the plant's cooling pond entered the Dnieper network, reaching the Kievan Sea the day after the explosion. By April 30th, it is threatening the city of Kiev itself. The highest concentrations of iodine-131 are found in the Kiev Reservoir on May 3rd. Because the capital draws its primary drinking water from the Dnieper and Desna rivers, the potential for mass internal contamination is catastrophic. Civil engineers are quietly forced into a desperate, massive infrastructure project. They rapidly construct underwater dams to trap the radioactive sediment. They begin drilling hundreds of deep artesian wells known as buvettes.
They must plunge 90 to 340 meters underground to secure uncontaminated aquifers for the city's population. All of this is happening while the news anchors smile and read reports about crop yields. But the hospital beds cannot be hidden. The sickness is spreading. Secret Politburo protocols reveal that by May 6th, authorities acknowledge internally that 3,454 people have been hospitalized. Out of those, 367 are officially suffering from severe acute radiation sickness. You are Lily Poberezhska. You are a young Ukrainian mother and teacher living in Kiev. You participated in that bright Mayday parade under the sunny skies. But now, the cognitive dissonance is breaking you. The truth is not found in the newspapers. It has to be deciphered from the shadows. Deprived of reliable journalism, you and your neighbors develop a highly active whisper network. Information flows through coded phone calls from relatives living near the exclusion zone. You observe the panicked faces of railway workers. You tune your radio into foreign broadcasts like Voice of America and Radio Free Europe, desperately trying to hear through the extensive Soviet jamming efforts.
The KGB is watching you. Declassified documents reveal that the Ukrainian KGB is highly active during this period. They are not distributing medicine. They are monitoring your psychological state and suppressing dissent. KGB agents in civilian clothes patrol the Kiev railway station to prevent foreign journalists from interviewing panicked residents. Internal intelligence memos specifically track the conversations of international students studying in Kiev. Major Komarevich explicitly instructs his undercover informants to identify and locate those responsible for spreading counter-narratives. The state views your fear as a threat to national security. But the Whisper Network delivers a piece of information that shatters your reality completely. You learn why the playgrounds are suddenly empty. Juvenile thyroid glands are highly susceptible to the rapid uptake of radioactive iodine-131, which is abundant in the early fallout and the local milk supply. You discover that the party elite, the nomenclatura who smiled from the podiums, had secretly whisked their own children away in black sedans to the airport for emergency evacuation. Immediately following the festivities, they saved their own bloodlines. They left your children behind to breathe the poison. The sudden realization of this ultimate betrayal transforms your fear into a deep-seated, agonizing resentment. The facade is over. You grab your 3-year-old daughter. You run to the chaotic Kiev railway station. You're about to become part of the mass, uncoordinated civilian exodus. You are about to literally push your child through the open window of a departing train car, begging strangers to take her away from the poison wind. This undeniable juxtaposition of the expendable proletariat against the protected political class shatters the foundational mythos of the communist system forever. You realize you are viewed merely as a biological asset. You are a biorobot, expected to march, expected to work, expected to absorb the lethal dosage without complaint. The authorities quietly decide to end the school year early. Over 201,000 students and schoolchildren will be hurriedly shipped to pioneer camps in the southern republics or to Moscow. This fundamentally empties the city of its youth, creating the haunting phenomenon known to survivors as the childless summer. But right now, standing on the train platform, you don't know about the summer. You only know the government lied. They didn't just know the air was poisoned. They deliberately kept you in the crosshairs to prove a point to the West, and their deception is only just beginning. You escape the suffocating panic of the Kiev railway station, but there is no refuge to be found. You walk through the heavy metal doors of the children's hospital in Kiev. The air inside smells faintly of bleach, sweat, and overwhelming fear. You are standing beside Alla Shapiro. She's a pediatric hematologist, and she is drowning in a sea of sick children. The buses keep arriving at the hospital gates, one after another, their exhaust fumes mixing with the invisible toxins in the air. They are unloading hundreds of irradiated kids. These are the toddlers who drank the local milk heavily laced with iodine-131. These are the school children who danced on the pavement of Krashatik Street on Mayday. Dr. Shapiro and her exhausted colleagues are forced to improvise in the dark. The Soviet state has provided absolutely no treatment protocols for a mass civilian radiological event. There is no specialized diagnostic equipment available in the wards. They do not even have basic uncontaminated medical supplies to work with. They are navigating this waking nightmare while being deliberately fed misinformation by their own superiors. But the physical symptoms cannot be hidden by state television broadcasts. Tens of thousands of citizens and first responders are flooding into clinics across the region. They present with severe nausea, crippling headaches, rapid heart palpitations, and extreme, debilitating exhaustion. These are the undeniable classic symptoms of acute radiation exposure. Behind closed doors, the Soviet bureaucracy is tracking the true toll meticulously, tallying the human cost of their lies. By May 12th, the inpatient count across the affected regions surges to a staggering 10,198 individuals. The hospital corridors are overflowing. The situation is spiraling entirely out of control. The Soviet Ministry of Health realizes they have a monumental, undeniable problem. If they admit the true scale of the casualties to the world, the illusion of socialist perfection shatters completely. They need a miracle. They need a way to make the sick disappear from the official ledgers. Here is what they did not tell you. On May 8th, the highest echelons of the Politburo meet in secret to solve the medical crisis. They do not authorize better medical treatments. They do not ship in clean blood or advanced medicine from abroad. Instead, they execute a profound, calculated statistical deception. The Politburo legally approves entirely new permissible levels of radiation exposure. They retroactively surpass the former safety standards by a factor of 10. In special, highly contaminated cases, they allow for acceptable limits to increase up to 50 times higher than what was previously considered safe for human life. By arbitrarily shifting the goalposts of human biology, the state achieves a bureaucratic miracle. Thousands of patients who are still actively suffering from severe radiological exposure are administratively healed with the stroke of a pen. They are rapidly discharged from the overflowing hospitals, pushed right back out into the contaminated streets of Kiev. But simply changing the safety limits is not enough to completely erase the tragedy. People are still visibly sick. People are still dying in their homes. The government needs a permanent, systemic mechanism to deny reality. This necessity leads to one of the most masterful strokes of bureaucratic evil in modern history. You must look away from Kiev, north to Moscow, to the office of the Soviet Deputy Minister of Health, Oleg Shepin. He is the architect of this erasure. On May 21, Shepin sends a classified coded telegram directly from Moscow to the Ukrainian health authorities. This telegram issues a chilling mandate. It strictly forbids doctors from diagnosing acute radiation sickness in the general civilian populace. So, what do you write on a patient's chart when their white blood cell count is plummeting from gamma exposure? Shepin's telegram provides the state-sanctioned answer. Medical professionals across the Republic are explicitly ordered to stamp the medical charts with a completely fabricated diagnosis. They must write vegetative-vascular dystonia. This is a vague, catch-all psychological diagnosis that is entirely unique to Soviet medicine. It is essentially the equivalent of neurasthenia, implying a nervous disorder triggered by everyday stress or a difficult working environment. By legally classifying severe physical radiation damage as a mere psychosomatic ailment, the state achieves three chilling objectives. First, it immediately keeps the official casualty and injury toll artificially low. This allows the USSR to proudly, falsely claim to the World Health Organization that the disaster is contained and the people are healthy. Second, it shifts the blame entirely away from the state's catastrophic nuclear failure and places it directly onto the individual citizen's mental fortitude. The state subtly suggests the patients are simply hysterical. They officially claim the citizens are suffering from an irrational radiophobia. But the third objective is the most devastating, and its cruel consequences still exist today. By formally diagnosing acute radiation poisoning as a mere psychological stress disorder, the government creates an ironclad legal cover for the future. They use this fabricated vegetative-vascular dystonia diagnosis to systematically deny these victims specialized state pensions. They aggressively deny them disability benefits. They deny them long-term radiological care in the difficult decades that followed. The state entirely abandons the survivors to manage their deteriorating irradiated health alone. Your government poisons you, tells you it is all in your head, and then permanently cuts off your financial support. While the doctors in Kiev are being forced to falsify these medical records to protect the state budget, an even darker, more violent betrayal is unfolding in the sky above the Republic. You thought the poison wind blowing into Kiev was just an unfortunate, unpredictable meteorological shift. You thought the weather was simply nature taking its course. You are wrong. The wind direction shifts once again. The massive, highly radioactive clouds begin to move northeast. They are heading directly toward the densely populated and politically critical areas of Moscow, Voronezh, and Yaroslav. The Kremlin realizes their own capital, the heart of the empire, is about to be blanketed by the lethal fallout. They authorize a desperate, highly classified intervention. The Soviet Air Force is fully mobilized. Military pilots, including Major Alexei Grushin, are ordered to immediately take to the sky. They fly their aircraft directly into the massive storm fronts, carrying the invisible Chernobyl plume. Their planes are loaded with specialized artillery shells filled with silver iodide. They fire these chemical payloads straight into the dark clouds. This is a massive, coordinated cloud seeding operation. And it works perfectly. The silver iodide successfully induces heavy, artificial rainfall. It intentionally washes the massive concentrations of radioactive particles right out of the atmosphere. The operation successfully stops the poison wind from reaching the political center of the empire. Moscow is completely spared. The political elite are safe from the dust. But the radioactive rain has to fall somewhere. By triggering those clouds, the Soviet military intentionally causes severe, localized nuclear fallout over the rural regions of Belarus and northern Ukraine. They condemn thousands of square miles of provincial countryside to catastrophic, long-term isotopic contamination. And the rural farmers, the innocent families living in those sacrifice zones, are given absolutely no warning of the impending radioactive rain. They are deliberately poisoned to protect the capital. The state does not just lie about the weather, they weaponize it against their own citizens. It is May 6th. The streets of Kiev are washed clean of the spring dust, but they are completely empty of children. The city is eerily silent, resembling Hamelin town after the Pied Piper has come and gone. You walk past the neighborhood playgrounds, and they are entirely abandoned. Unpicked fruit falls heavily from the branches and rots on the ground. No child comes to claim it. Instead, the rotting fruit is quickly washed into the radioactive storm drains by the daily military street cleanings. The state tells you everything is fine, but the physical landscape of your city is being subjected to radical, continuous decontamination efforts. The municipal trucks never stop spraying their sticky organic polymer. The sweet, cloying scent of the molasses solution mixes with the sharp, metallic taste of iodine in the air. You are living inside a paradox. You are ordered to go to work and smile, while the military aggressively foams the sidewalks outside your window. The theater of the absurd reaches its absolute peak on this day. The 39th Course de la Paix cycling event is scheduled to begin. It is billed as the premier sporting event of the Eastern Bloc. The Western teams have completely boycotted the Kiev stages due to the severe radiation fears. They know the truth. But the cyclists from Czechoslovakia, Poland, and East Germany are given a horrific ultimatum. They are explicitly ordered to race. They are told that refusal will mean the immediate, permanent end of their sporting careers and severe social repercussions. These athletes are essentially held hostage by authoritarian pride. You watch them line up in the shadow of a nuclear disaster. There are 64 tense, unsmiling cyclists standing at the start line. They look terrified. You watch Vladimir Kozarek, a highly competitive cyclist from Czechoslovakia. He manages to avoid the start due to a genuine medically documented fever. He is physically ill. Yet the Soviet state aggressively brands him a malingerer and permanently bans him from future international competitions. The message to the rest of the peloton is absolute. You ride or your life is over. His teammate, Joseph Regic, submits to the overwhelming pressure. The starting gun fires. The captive peloton begins pedaling through the radioactive dust of the Ukrainian capital. It is a visceral, agonizing sequence. These elite athletes are forced to operate at maximum physical exertion. They are breathing heavily, drawing the invisible transuranic elements deep into their lungs with every single pedal stroke. Regic actually wins the first stage in Kiev. He stands on the podium and accepts his forced victory. 2 decades later, the delayed toll of the poison wind will manifest. Doctors will diagnose Regic with a malignant tumor, necessitating the immediate removal of his left kidney. It is a tragedy he directly attributes to this state-mandated race. While the cyclists sweat poison for the cameras, ordinary citizens are desperately trying to break the information blockade. The Whisper network is frantic. You try to go to the Kiev railway station to speak to a foreign journalist. You want to tell the outside world about the panic and the missing children, but you cannot. KGB agents in civilian clothes are heavily patrolling the train platforms. They actively prevent anyone from giving interviews. The Ukrainian KGB is highly active, but they are not protecting the population from radiation. They are monitoring the psychological state of the citizens and brutally suppressing dissent.
The secret police generate highly classified internal intelligence memos. They specifically track the private conversations of international students studying in Kiev. The KGB notes with immense alarm that students from the Middle East are spreading panicked words and tendentious interpretations. The informants record these students theorizing that the explosion is an act of deliberate sabotage. Some are even calling the disaster karma and God's punishment against the communists. Major Komarevich of the KGB explicitly instructs his undercover informants to identify and locate those responsible for spreading these counternarratives. The state deliberately prioritizes its own ideological security over the public health of its citizens. The government tells you the water is perfectly safe to drink. They print it in the newspapers. But at night, civil engineers are quietly ripping apart the city. They are rapidly constructing underwater dams to trap radioactive sediment. They are drilling hundreds of deep artesian wells right in the middle of the city. These buvettes plunge 90 to 340 meters underground to secure uncontaminated aquifers. The state claims the Dnieper River is clean, yet they are desperately digging hundreds of meters into the earth to find water that will not kill you. The contradictions are everywhere. They are suffocating. But the greatest, most devastating contradiction of all brings us back to the promise of the maps. Remember the classified documents published 20 years later. Remember the detailed, color-coded pages showing the exact dispersion of the Chernobyl plume. While the KGB arrests students for whispering, and while the military foams the empty playgrounds, the inner circle of the Ukrainian Communist Party sits in their sealed, uncontaminated offices. It is April 29th. This is 2 full days before they order thousands of children to march in the Mayday parade. The maps are laid out on their desks. Soviet monitoring teams have created them in real time. The leadership traces their fingers over the paper. They look at the northwestern neighborhood of Nivki. They see the specific, violent spike registering at 15 milliroentgens per hour. They watch the invisible payload crawl block by block across their capital. They have the absolute empirical proof of a lethal, escalating epidemiological disaster staring them right in the face.
They know the air is toxic. They know the water supply is laced with isotopes. They possess every single piece of terrifying data required to order an immediate, comprehensive evacuation of the city. They know exactly what will happen to the juvenile thyroid glands of the kids if they are sent outside. The decision to proceed is not made in ignorance. It is made with absolute, chilling clarity. They look at the lethal radiation readings, they look at the calendar, and they make a choice that will seal the fate of millions. You are sitting in the sealed, secure office of the Ukrainian Communist Party's Central Committee. It is April 29th. The air in this room is filtered and perfectly safe. Spread across the large wooden desk are the classified documents. They are the detailed, color-coded radiation maps created in real time by Soviet monitoring teams. You look at the dark, spreading zones of contamination. You trace the Chernobyl plume as it crawls block by block directly over the city of Kiev. You look specifically at the northwestern neighborhood of Nivki. The instruments have recorded a violent, undeniable spike. The radiation levels there have hit 15 milliroentgens per hour. This represents an exposure rate dozens to hundreds of times higher than normal background levels.
The men in this room know exactly what these numbers mean. They know the air is saturated with radioactive dust. They know the Dnieper River basin is breached. They understand the profound danger this poses to the juvenile thyroid glands of every child living in the capital. They hold the absolute, undeniable proof in their hands. And then they fold the maps away. They lock them in a drawer. They deliberately choose to proceed with the Mayday parade. They prioritize their ideological optics and their state reputation over the fundamental survival of their own citizens. This is the complete answer to the mystery. The government did not fail to detect the poison wind. They mapped it, they studied it, and then they knowingly marched thousands of children into it to prove a political point. When Ukrainian journalist Alla Yarashevska finally published those classified maps in 2006, the entire country was forced to confront the physical evidence of their betrayal. The color-coded pages were the smoking gun. The revelation of these maps decades later confirms what the survivors already knew in their bones. The citizens of Kiev quickly realized they were viewed merely as biological assets.
The state officially adopted the chilling term bio-robots for the soldiers sent to clear the highly radioactive debris from the reactor roof. But the people marching on Koshchatik Street were treated exactly the same way. You were a bio-robot. Your purpose was to project an illusion of absolute safety. The secret evacuation of the elite political families while the working class remained in the contaminated zone acted as the ultimate catalyst for the disillusionment of the Soviet populace. The mothers who pushed their toddlers through the chaotic train windows during the childless summer were not suffering from irrational radiophobia. They were the only ones seeing reality clearly. This profound betrayal fueled the nascent Ukrainian independence movement. It contributed directly to the dissolution of the entire Soviet Empire.
But what happened to the architects of this massive deception? Volodymyr Sherbitsky, the man who forced his own grandson to stand in the radioactive dust, saw his legacy entirely destroyed. He was finally removed from power amidst widespread protests in 1989, but he never faced true accountability. On February 16, 1990, Sherbitsky died under highly suspicious circumstances. Persistent rumors of suicide swirled around his sudden death. This occurred exactly one day before he was scheduled to testify before the Supreme Soviet regarding his specific role in the Chernobyl cover-up. The secrets of the April 29th meeting went into the earth with him. Meanwhile, in Moscow, the orchestrators of the medical cover-up completely escaped justice. Deputy Minister of Health Oleg Shepin successfully erased thousands of victims from the official ledgers. By mandating the fabricated diagnosis of vegetative-vascular dystonia, he provided the state with ironclad legal cover. The government used this vague psychological diagnosis to systematically deny victims specialized state pensions and disability benefits in the decades that followed. They completely abandoned the survivors to manage their deteriorating health alone.
This deliberate manipulation of medical data is why the exact death toll of Chernobyl remains a fiercely debated and deeply sensitive topic today. Estimates range from 4,000 eventual deaths predicted by the World Health Organization to over 200,000 casualties claimed by independent regional studies. The numbers are wildly disputed precisely because the Soviet state turned a massive epidemiological crisis into an administrative ghost story. They did not just poison their people, they legally denied that the poison ever existed. You can still see the tragic consequences playing out in the lives of the survivors. Think of Josef Frgek, the Czechoslovakian cyclist forced to pedal through the contaminated ghost town during the peace race. 2 decades after he rode through the radioactive dust of Kiev, doctors diagnosed him with a malignant tumor. He required the immediate surgical removal of his left kidney. It is a tragedy he and many others attribute directly to the state-mandated race. He was held hostage by authoritarian pride, and his body paid the price. But the history is not just found in medical charts. It is physically embedded in the streets of modern-day Kiev. You can walk through the city right now and interact with the enduring scars of 1986. Because the radioactive sludge heavily laced with iodine-131 and cesium-137 breached the Dnieper River basin, the water supply was severely compromised. Civil engineers initiated a desperate infrastructure project. They drilled hundreds of deep artesian wells across the city. These wells are known as buvettes. They plunge 90 to 340 meters underground to secure uncontaminated aquifers. If you walk through Kiev today, you will still see ordinary citizens lining up with plastic jugs to receive uncontaminated water from these exact pumps. A modern-day Kiev buvette being used by a civilian is an enduring physical scar of the days the wind brought poison. It serves as a permanent, physical monument to survival. It is a daily reminder that the rivers were once toxic and the government lied about it. This story matters today more than ever. It is not just about the technical failure of a graphite-moderated reactor. It serves as a masterclass in authoritarian gaslighting. It explores the precise mechanics of how a centralized government can weaponize information and enforce a systemic denial of reality. The state deployed the Soviet Air Force to manipulate the weather, artificially washing the radiation out of the sky to protect Moscow. They deliberately sacrificed the rural populations of Belarus and northern Ukraine to protect the political center of the empire. They poisoned the peripheries to save themselves. The radioactive winds that blew through Kiev did more than just poison the environment. They completely stripped away the facade of the Soviet state. The government prioritized ideological optics over human life. They believed that if they controlled the newspapers, they could control the isotopes. They believed that if they threatened the doctors, the sickness would simply disappear. They were fundamentally wrong. You cannot build a functioning society on a foundation of lethal lies. Eventually, the radiation burns through the propaganda, and when the dust finally settles, all that remains is the undeniable truth of a government that traded the breath of its own children for a moment of political pride.